The AI-generated game era is here, whether or not we want it to be. And I want to take some time to talk about it because I've seen a lot of hate, and while some of it is definitely deserved, I think we can actually benefit a lot from these AI games. Hear me out, guys. I don't think it's all bad. I know the comments are going to be flaming you before we've even started, but I do think there is some actual value in these types of tools and these types of projects being made. For a little bit of context on what's going on, a certain developer known as Levels.io, Peter, decided he wanted to make a game. So he started vibe coding in Cursor and built a 3D flying game in vanilla JS and HTML. Not true, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute. But what he built's not the worst thing. I am amused that I just got told the Firefox is too slow. I feel you, man. I really do. It's a pretty basic flight sim game built using 3JS in the browser with a whole lot of money spent by brands to put their ads on it because it went super viral. There's a lot of reasons to be frustrated because there are developers who have spent their entire lives building incredible games that have made less money than Peter makes in a day off of this project that he didn't even really code or even really know how to describe the inner workings of. But I don't think it's all bad. And I think our frustrations are terribly misplaced right now when we talk about the current state of AI coding. And I want to talk about the good sides of this and how we as an industry can benefit from buggy messes like what you're seeing here. But unlike Peter, I don't have a game that's just printing money for me online, so I have to pay my editor somehow. Quick word from today's sponsor, and then we'll dive right in. I don't know about you guys, but I've been spinning up way more apps lately, just one-off solutions to problems I had. Because I'm making so many more things, I am experimenting with more tools to make them, and I found a few that really stand out. Today's sponsor is one of them. Lovable is one of the best ways to spin up your next project. It literally takes seconds to go from an idea to an actual deployed application. I could talk all about it, but I'd rather just show you. I'm going to ask Lovable to make me a request form for myself, the YouTuber, in order to allow brands to inquire about possibly sponsoring my videos. And now it's generating. You get an actual code environment as well as a nice traditional preview environment too. It's so cool they have a little switch to switch between the two. While it's finishing up generation, I want to tell you about some of my favorite features in Lovable. My favorite by far is this GitHub button. It's not a usual GitHub button that just exports. It lets you sync the project between GitHub and Lovable. So unlike a lot of the other AI gen tools, you can go spin up your normal IDE, make changes, push them, and they'll still be here in Lovable. And here we are, an actual deployable app that looks pretty stunning. It left a spot here for us to add our usernames wherever else. And if I want to do that, or if I just want to get rid of it, I'll show you one of my favorite features, the edit button. Here, you just click a given area and tell it what you want to change. So I'm going to click here on Theo sponsorships, and I can actually change the text. So I'm going to change this to sponsor Theo. But I also could tell Lovable itself to modify things. So once I make that code change, I can also click it again and tell it, get rid of the gradient on the text. And there, I literally clicked it, told it what to do, and it did it. So if you're not as familiar with front-end code, this is going to be a lifesaver for you because you don't have to figure out how to do all these different things. You just click here, you click the thing you want to change, and you tell it what to change, and it will do it. If you want to figure out what devs love about Lovable, check them out today at soydev.link/lovable. I'm going to go down a slightly weird tangent that for some of you will immediately make a lot of sense, and for the rest of you will be very confusing, depending probably largely on your age. We need to talk about Flash games. For those who are not familiar, Flash was the prominent way of building interactive applications on the web for a while. The reason was that the web wasn't really interactive. It had HTML and links, forms, and that was about it. If you wanted to have a game or an interactive experience or like a portal, Flash was the way you did it. And Flash fundamentally changed what we expect from software. It made it so more people could make software, more people could share that software, and more people, most importantly, could try that software without having to go to a store and buy it on a disk. It was a massive shift in what we expected from software, and in particular, it revolutionized the game space. All of a sudden, you could embed a 400 pixel wide game into your website that you spun up over a week before, just hacking away at this weird scripting language with ActionScript and the horrible but functional developer tools that Adobe had built around it. At the time, it massively lowered the barrier for entry for people who wanted to start experimenting with things like gamedev. And the result was insane. Addicting Games likely hosted somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 Flash games in its library. Larger Flash game ecosystem across all major portals collectively hosted tens of thousands of games, with estimates suggesting that there were well over 100,000 Flash games created in total across the internet during Flash's lifetime. I vividly remember in middle school going through addicting games and Newgrounds, just looking for new experiences to have. And there were so many of them, like truly an unbelievable amount. Apparently, Flashpoint is already at 173,000 games. Flashpoint's an attempt to archive and make playable all these old Flash games because Flash, for many reasons, was deprecated and killed by Adobe back all the way in like 2018 or so, formally killed in 2020. The reasons for it are interesting, and we'll go through all that in a minute. But the main thing I really want to highlight with Flash was the ratio of slop to innovation and what that enabled for the right motivated people. Of these 173,000 games, 172,500 of them are absolute shovelware garbage. It's like a less than 1 in 100 hit rate for these at best. And this is just the ones that people bothered to archive. There are even more that people never bothered with. But there was a small number of them that were truly special and allowed for new ideas to be felt out in a way they hadn't been before. Games that are still massive to this day, like Bloons Tower Defense, started as a Flash game. Companies like PopCap that went on to make things like Plants vs. Zombies, Zuma, Bejeweled, and more started as Flash game developers and then pivoted into Java web games for a little bit and then started making dedicated software. This era was incredible. And I was just so inspired as a kid seeing all of these new things being created constantly. And there had never been anything like it before. The things that made Flash special were a combination of accessibility of the tooling, the fact that like it was free to get started and anyone could just download the software and start making Flash games, the simplicity of distribution, and of course, novelty. These three things allowed for Flash games to do what had really never been done before. The idea of a website you could go to and just click buttons and have different experiences that were, yes, made by a human, yes, mostly garbage. But most importantly, the variety was incredible and the accessibility of it was insane. Previously, you'd have to go to a store to buy games or download a demo if they even had one for the thing you were interested in, which they often didn't. Now there's just a portal you can go to and play with random people's ideas. And if you're an inspired person that wants to make something, this went from a dream that you could possibly achieve in 10 years after college to a program you could install on your computer, and you didn't have to worry about finding a way to get it to your friends or show people to play. You just upload it on Newgrounds, and now the world has access to it. It was truly incredible to see a world where game dev was now accessible and anyone could try these games too. It's hard to put into words how unique that was because nowadays you just open up your Xbox, go to the store and hit download. But at the time, this was nuts. There was one last piece here that I think is somewhat valuable and definitely is contributing to the vibe difference here. Basically impossible to charge money. Flash had no concept of networking really at all. So these games were almost entirely free. Sometimes they were covered in ads, and believe me, they were covered in a lot of ads. But these games were free. And that was super cool, especially for young kids, playing with them, getting inspired, downloading the tools, fighting them endlessly, and eventually making something that was inspiring. So cool. And I would pretty much guarantee that a lot of the games you love today come from people who grew up either playing these Flash games or trying to build them themselves. It's really hard to put into words how important this was for a whole generation of game developers. And not just game devs either. There's a good chance I would never have gotten into software dev either if it wasn't for the incredible, inspiring experiences I had with these absolute garbage games. We do have to talk about the garbage. Why did Flash die? There is one relatively simple answer to the question of why Flash died. The answer is Steve Jobs. But it's as simple and short as it is, the layers to it are much more complex. The reason Flash actually died is that Jobs refused to put it on the iPhone because there's a lot of reasons, but the main ones were like security and the interface. It's the same reason Apple won't put a touchscreen on a laptop because the UI and the experience on my laptop was built to have a very fine pointing device. And if I tried to like touch a small button that exists in my UI, like try to touch that little Apple button in the corner or try to touch like a specific thing in this menu, it's not good for that. Apple built an entirely different experience for touch than they built for pointers. Flash games were not going to handle the move to touch at all. And the security issues in Flash's weird way of embedding a native runtime were strange, because Flash wasn't a browser technology. It wasn't a thing built to work inside of Canvas using browser standards. None of that existed at the time. Browsers were a mess. The way Flash worked is it would do a native embed on the system that allowed you to mount the Flash game from your computer inside of the browser as like a little portal into it. But that also meant that you were downloading things from the internet that would then run on your system. And if the Flash runtime wasn't super well thought out and locked down, you were kind of screwed. So for these reasons, Steve Jobs refused to put Flash on the iPhone. It did make it to Android, and I think that really showed how right Jobs was as a person who bought an Android phone largely to play Flash games on it as a kid. There were like 2 that kind of worked, and they were awful, super jank, and caused my battery life to go from its really reliable 3 hours down to like 20 to 30 minutes. It was a rough time. I would not recommend going back to Flash and all of the chaotic ways it did things. But that chaos and instability was what enabled this level of flexibility and creation that didn't exist. Part of it, and I guess I really should put this in the list, was the consistency of the platform. The fact that there was this universal thing that basically everyone had to have installed to use the web, because so many experiences were in Flash at this point. You had to have Flash on your computer. It meant that I knew you would be able to play my game. Even if I was building traditional games and handing out the discs, I could never guarantee that it would work on your computer, especially if you're on an operating system different from what I built. Maybe you don't have a GPU yet because we're back in that era. The likelihood you can actually run the software I made was really low. With Flash, it was basically a guarantee. The Flash vibe of generating new ideas and putting things out died for a couple key parts. The first one, as I was hinting at before, was the platform divergence. The fact that a game you made on your computer might work great on a browser, but good luck getting that working on a phone or a Steam Deck or a console. It meant the platforms people were on differed greatly enough that this thing you just put some time into to throw together, when you send it to your friend, you don't know what device they're going to open it on and how it's going to work. That was a huge barrier of entry. The other problem was a lack of clear entry point. Once Flash died, there was no longer a simple getting started point. We had projects like Game Maker that, as jank as they are, resulted in masterpieces like Undertale. We also had cool web tools and technologies like the HTML5 revolution that Steve Jobs pitched as the alternative to Flash that is theoretically capable of incredible things, but the variety of the quality of that software and the experience you'll have developing it was insane. And then we started getting more and bigger game engines, specifically Unity and Unreal Engine, taking off. And while there are now great resources for getting started with them, the amount that any one of those tools or technologies changes makes it pretty hard to get into now. Even web tools like Phaser, the gap between Phaser.js 2 and 3, and if you don't know, Phaser's a 2D pseudo 3D game engine for the web that's very well regarded. Some of my favorite games like Vampire Survivors were built in Phaser. The gap between Phaser 2 and 3 makes it really, really hard to dive into in a meaningful way. So despite my best attempts to try and make something similar to the Flash game era myself, because I wanted to experiment with ideas, the lack of a clear entry point has been tough. But possibly the biggest thing is lack of good distribution. While we do now have the expectation that we can go to a website and have an experience, and the web tools and technologies have progressed massively, the lack of a site like Addicting Games or Newgrounds that we go to looking for new experiences means you have to build your distribution yourself. You can't just put something out there and expect it to go the way it used to. There isn't the same scarcity for novel experiences online, and now we're fighting platforms like Twitter and YouTube trying to keep the user's attention from drifting towards things like experimental games. The result of all of this can be put pretty simply: too much friction. If there is a kid that has a silly idea for a game, like what if I want to make Vampire Survivors but with hats instead of weapons? What if I want to make a Diner Dash style game, but I'm doing it underwater? Just the silly types of ideas that resulted in crazy projects and concepts being built. That all kind of fizzled out. And the friction for somebody who has no idea what they're doing to get started is way too high. And if we compare this to other types of software dev, like, I don't know, web dev, it's surprisingly easy to get started with an actual web dev experience. You can just Google search how to get started with React. It's sent to the React docs, click the tiny little started with Stackblitz button, and then in your browser, have a full editor experience with a project with like 20 lines of code and basic comments describing what they do. And now you can make changes and immediately see it on the other side of the browser window. Devs aren't getting started in easier languages like Python and Visual Basic anymore. They're not getting started in Scratch by MIT anymore. They're getting started in React a third of the time, which is kind of nuts, but it also shows how accessible those tools are and how wide a range of good educational materials there are. For things that aren't web apps, the friction's gone up, but things that are web apps, the friction's gone down. And it's been really weird to see how over time, an aspiring developer has had their time split just shifted in such weird ways. To like quickly chart this out, if we use green for game, green game makes sense. The effort to make a game used to be insanely high. It slowly started going down as we got better and better engine tech. And then Flash dropped it insanely low. And then as soon as Flash died, it spiked back up. Not as high as it was pre-Flash, but high enough that it was not fun. And I would honestly say over time, it's slowly been getting worse. Whereas building an app started lower for sure, but it has been very consistently getting easier and easier to build applications on the web. You can build some pretty incredible things relatively quickly now. But if you want to make a cookie clicker game, good luck, have fun. It isn't too bad, but like it's not as easy as it should be by any stretch of the imagination. And as the AAA game world keeps pushing for more graphics, more frames, more highlighting, more lighting, all these things, the amount of money it takes to make a AAA game has consistently gone up by like 2 to 3x every few years, and it's become an entirely unsustainable industry. That's why we're seeing the indie resurgence that we're seeing today. So why am I talking about all of this stuff with Flash and mobile games and whatnot? We'll get there because I have a little more I want to say about this. Mobile was weird. At the first WWDC, which is the Apple conference about developer stuff, the first one they did after the iPhone launch, Steve Jobs came out very confidently defending HTML5, saying this is the future of applications. You can make great apps in the browser because they didn't have an app store. Eventually, they caved and made the app store, and the app store ended up being the closest thing we had to a Flash revolution again. The mobile app stores worked pretty well because it hit a lot of these points. The tooling was not as accessible as it should have been. Sadly, that was the biggest L. But if you had a Mac and you had Xcode, you could figure something out. Simplicity of distribution, again, not great, but at the very least, there was one place you would distribute. So it was simple in the sense you had one decision to make. You put it on the App Store. The novelty was massive for apps at the time. Just like it was so exciting to see all these experiences you could have in your pocket. It was like the handheld gaming revolution with the Game Boy all over again, and it was super cool. It was actually possible to charge money, but only upfront for the game. So that part was different too. But the biggest thing, the consistency of the platform. Every iPhone was the exact same screen size and resolution for a while, which meant that you could make the game work perfectly in this one way, and it would work fine for all of the users. And that was incredible. It meant that you could make this game perfectly work on your phone and know it would work for everyone else's, mostly. Despite that, the additional friction in the parts up here meant that there were way fewer people making these games. And it also meant that the novelty of them wore off a lot quicker because the amount of unique ideas being shown in these games was relatively low. And nowadays, when I open up the App Store and look at top games, the only real difference between what I saw 10 years ago and now is that like half of them are full of loot crates, but the same stupid game ideas are still there. And a lot of them are just based on old Flash games in the first place. That said, mobile did allow for some level of indie game development to happen, but slowly over time, mobile moved us away from the web. The existence of a single app store that is the place where all software has to be approved and distributed was a massive limiting factor to what we could do on the platform. That, combined with the fact that everything we would browse became a native app, meant that we're spending way less time in Safari or Chrome and way more time in those native apps on our phones. We don't go to youtube.com, we go to YouTube. We don't go to twitter.com, we go to the X app. You don't go to twitch.tv. Actually, you might because the mobile app for Twitch sucks. But we started living in these apps, which meant we couldn't have these novel experiences. And the couple companies that tried to like build games into Facebook Messenger, for example, Apple would come in and threaten Facebook with bans from the App Store if they didn't remove it because they saw that as a way of circumventing Apple's distribution. So we've been pushed away from the web as users experiencing novel things. As a result, it's even harder for us to find these games in the first place. And it's harder to build them because of the fracturing of the ecosystem. I hope that we can all agree with this statement. Given all else being equal, Flash was easier to build games in than HTML5, and it's not particularly close. I hope we can all agree with this statement because it is true. It's just, this is reality. Flash was bad. ActionScript was terrible. There's a lot of lessons we can learn from the things it did wrong, but it was a hell of a lot easier to get started in than it was to get started in something like Phaser or 3JS, or certainly not Unity or Unreal Engine. And as a result of all of this, I can't really remember the last time a web game really like blew me away. The closest thing is Vampire Survivors, and people don't even think of that as a web game anymore. This era died, and I miss it dearly. My favorite thing in games isn't the quality of the textures or the months of work somebody put into making the shape of this tree as elegant as possible. What I love about gaming is the novelty, uniqueness, and creativity of the people making the games. I want to see things I can't see in other mediums. I want to have experiences I could never have fathomed before. My favorite games aren't things like God of War. My favorite games are things like Undertale and Outer Wilds. And Flash allowed for a lot of these novel experiences to be created. Even if the quality of them wasn't great, it was a phenomenal starting point for people who have become some of my favorite game devs in the world. And there are even games like Getting Over It. If you're not familiar, Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy is a wild experience of a game. The whole game is narrated by its creator as you play it. You are a guy in a pot with a hammer that has to move using the hammer. A fun thing a lot of people don't know about this game is that it's actually based on an old, crappy Flash game that was made by this weird guy who would just put together these entirely broken experiences, throw them up on Clooney Games with a bunch of stock assets, and like a handful of weirdos like myself would find them and just be so curious about why the hell this thing exists and what you're supposed to be able to do with it. Bennett Foddy spent like hours just passing the first tree in the game when it was a Flash thing. And then like 10 years later, rebuilt it as a real game that went very well and made a ton of money. It has 70,000 positive reviews. Think about how few people review. This game sold insanely well. It became a viral sensation. That is from a concept from a bad Flash game. One of my favorite platformers stemmed out of Fancy Pants, which was a super smooth platforming game originally built in Flash. This era was so genuinely cool. And a lot of it was the ease of the tools and the access, that you could have something that kind of worked before you got frustrated and gave up. And that's also part of why learning React today is more fun than learning these game dev tools, is you can get something working faster than you would otherwise. There's a metric I talk about a lot with the businesses I work with. I call it time to smile. How long does it take from when someone discovers your thing or starts using your thing to get their first smile from it? So with a product like T3 Chat, my AI chat app, I asked myself, like, how quickly can I get a user who just heard about us and went to the homepage to be happy with the experience they're having, to feel something good about it? And with the tools that I build, we're able to get this time down to be really short. We did a speedrunning contest for Upload Thing where a user could get started on Upload Thing and have a file uploading on their production service in less than like 4 minutes. We had users doing it in 30 seconds once they were familiar. The goal is to get you that first hit, that first reward, that first feeling of, oh, I kind of get this. I see where I can go with this. I love that. And I think it's really important for people getting started in a thing to get to that first reward as quickly as possible. And if it takes too long to hit that first smile, to hit that first, oh shit, maybe I can do it, then the likelihood you get through is really low. The thing that was so exciting about Flash was that you could use the templates and scaffolds it came with, write like 2 crappy lines of action script, drag and drop some assets on the screen, and have something that worked, something that was interactive, something you could share with your friends. And that was incredible. And we've slowly lost that over time. The time from, I have this weird idea for a game, but I'm not a game dev, to my friend can try it on their computer has been going up over time, not down. And that sucks for creativity and for getting more people into development of everything, much less games. The friction to get started with game dev has gotten to a point where even if you do push through and you make something that works, the likelihood you can get your friends to even try it is low. Even if they want to, they're on the same platform as you and you don't have a distribution method that works, especially if you're building for mobile. Good luck, have fun. Not great. So if I was to summarize the problems that exist right now, say problem 1, the tools are too confusing. Not just that the tools themselves are hard to use, but figuring out which one to use in the first place is a massive challenge. The time to smile is way too high. We have regressed massively in that regard. The time it takes for somebody getting started with game dev to feel their first win is far too high. And even if you push through all of that, you find the right tools, you build something that you're proud of and really excited about, sharing what you build is annoying as hell now. We went from the annoyance of having to ship discs out to people and sell things in stores to a much happier distribution method with the web and Flash and Java, back to this esoteric, hopefully the platform your user's on can actually support the thing that you're building. We just at the start had a problem where I couldn't play Peter's game because I was in a Firefox-based browser, not a Chrome-based browser. This is not okay for people trying to get started who just want to send a game to their friend. They built it on their Android phone, they send it to their friend on an iPhone, and they can't run it. That sucks. All of these things take so much wind out of your sails and keep you from having that, oh shit, I can do this moment. And it's so, so important that we can have those moments. We need to shorten the time from when someone has an idea to when they can share it with their friends, or we're risking losing a generation of inspired people. I'm not saying we should find the simplest tool and just use it forever, even if it works for lunatics like Toby Fox in Undertale. What I am saying is that when you're getting started, that level of friction sucks. If you look at somebody on a bike with training wheels, you might laugh and say, who needs those? You do when you're getting started. It's so, so handy to have these extra things to get you through the rough moment of getting started with a thing that is as esoteric, unfamiliar, and just unnatural as developing a game. And I hate how nowadays it feels like we're pulling up the ladder behind us because so many of the people complaining about AI games got started in a worse era in Flash. Time for the spicy takes. Vibe-coded AI games are the closest thing we've had to Flash since Flash. I'm sorry. It's true. The magic of AI game development is it solves so many of the problems that we were talking about up here. Accessibility of the tooling. You go to a website and start typing what you want. Simplicity of distribution. You hit the share button and now you can share it. Novelty. Holy shit, I can just talk about the game I want and it exists. And I can hit this button and share it with my friends. People can try all these crazy new things. Basically impossible to charge money. AI is really bad at implementing Stripe. And consistency of the platform. For the first time, HTML5 games are actually accessible to the general person. Just to prove my point here, Levels confidently stated that his game here, the flying game that he built in the browser, was vanilla HTML and JS. It's not. It's 3JS. 3JS is a super complex and powerful library for doing 3D rendering and graphic stuff in a canvas. That's not vanilla. But he feels like it's vanilla because it's a decision he didn't have to make. The decision fatigue has been massively reduced by these AI tools. You don't have to pick the things you want to use. You tell the AI what you want, and it will pick. It won't do a great job of picking, but it will do it. And thankfully, there are good enough open source things in the web for building experiences that it kind of works out. And to be extraordinarily clear, I'm not saying the next Balatro or Minecraft is going to be an AI game, but I am saying the next Local Thunk or Notch might start as an AI developer. There's a very good chance of that. But there are also massive problems with AI games. And I'm not going to talk about artists losing jobs. That's not what we're here to discuss. There are real problems in the game industry, and most of them are overinvesting in the wrong things. What we really need to talk about is the state of open source gaming. Imagine we're back in 2004, right as Gmail is starting to come out. The team it took to build something as powerful and useful as Gmail at the time was massive. I don't even want to think about the number of engineers and the number of hours they put in to build a great experience for email in the browser. Since then, the tools used by companies like Google, like Facebook, like many more, have not only improved massively, they've been open sourced, which means the tools that are used to build things like Gmail today are accessible to anyone who wants to do it. And there are tons of examples of all of this around too, which means that an independent dev or a two-person team can reasonably build a Gmail alternative now, which is insane. That go back to 2004 and say, yeah, I'm going to build a clone of Gmail with my one friend here. You'd be laughed at. It's just not viable with the state of the tools and technology. But the ecosystem has improved so much. And the companies that built these solutions knew it needed to be easier. So they went out of their way to open source their learnings and knowledge in order to make it easier to do these things. And a whole community of this open source work started to form that has resulted in so much good tooling, so much good resources, and so many great examples of how to build awesome things for the web and for production grade software. The state of open source tooling in the web is incredible. But beyond that, the amount of good open source examples of how to build things for the web is insane. Gaming never had this open source revolution. We can talk all we want about Godot. I've only played one Godot game I really loved. We can talk all we want about Phaser and 3JS. The number of games that have found real success with them is relatively low, and the amount of good open source examples of those tools is near zero. We don't have great open source work to reference like we do for application development. There are so many tools you would never even imagine are open source, like cal.com, which is a great Calendly alternative. All their code's on GitHub. You can see how they built Cal, and that obviously is super beneficial if you're trying to learn to build production-grade services. However, it's also really useful for the AIs. AI is trained on large swaths of example data, and it's auto-completing what it thinks is most likely based on the massive pile of data it has been trained on. If we have this massive set of examples of using React to build applications as well as the tooling around it, it's all open source, it's very easy to train an AI to autocomplete a React app. I would estimate that we have less than 1/100th as much good training data for game stuff that we have for application stuff. Even just like the ratio of different frameworks to applications versus different game engines to games, the ratios on all of this are insane, and there just isn't good open source work out there for you to reference. And this hurts in multiple ways. It hurts you as an individual trying to learn from examples that are exciting, but it also hurts the AI's ability to reference good code and things that it can generate on top of. And this has hurt gaming forever. Quickly cite a video I watched recently that I found very entertaining from Juniper Dev here. I was just glazing Undertale.
I saw the title, but I'm not talking
Undertale's a terrible game.
about the gameplay. I'm not talking about the dialogue. I'm not talking about the story. I'm talking about the way that the game was made. See, Toby...
Let me find a good example here of, oh yeah, his attempts to make it so the game would delete itself at the end. This was actual code that got decompiled from the game. All of Undertale's dialogue is handled in one spaghetti code massive switch statement that takes thousands of lines. So every line of dialogue in the game is this one single giant switch statement with thousands of cases. When there aren't good reference examples on the internet, you end up with things like this. And to be extraordinarily clear, I don't fault Toby at all. He made something that works. He made something that's incredible. He made something that changed video games forever while barely knowing how to code. And even then, when it came time to distribute it to other platforms that weren't the like crappy 640 by 480 desktop game he distributed on Steam, he had to pay other companies to come in and ship it for other platforms. His ability to take this mess and put it on the Steam Deck or the Switch or the Xbox was not there, so he brought in others to do it, in an otherwise almost entirely solo developed game, because he just wanted to make this thing with a specific vibe. He didn't want to do all of the other parts. That said, if there were good examples of how to do the other parts right, there's a very, very good chance he could have figured out these things. And to those saying, well, isn't GameMaker primarily a visual programming engine? No more so than Unreal or Unity is. It's a canvas engine with a bunch of code that you have to write too. It does have the option to use their weird visual programming block thing, but no one actually uses that, including Toby. He did actually write the code. There's an interview where he talks about discovering arrays and realizing he could use that for dialogue systems. He did write the code. Doesn't mean it was good, but he did actually write it. Yeah, people confuse GameMaker with RPG Maker. Absolutely. Although it's also worth noting that Toby Fox started with RPG Maker, which was much more basic and rudimentary, and he moved to Game Maker when he was building something a little more legit. So the quality of code in the game space is atrocious. So one, quality of game code is generally garbage. Point two, there are near zero examples publicly of good game code and best practices. You basically have to watch tutorials and hope the person doing the tutorial actually knows what they're talking about, because you can't reference their work. If you doubt my knowledge of how to build software, you can go to my GitHub and look through the things I built to see it. In gamedev, you can look at the game, but you can't see underneath, see what they actually built. And as a result, there is very little shared progress in the game dev world. And I'm sorry to the game developers in my audience. I hope most of you will agree here, and I hope the ones who don't can take some time to reflect. The magic of open source is that when a win happens in one framework, it can be shared across others. You might not like server components and all the crazy server rendering stuff going on in React, but it's enabled a new level of interop between the server and client that many other frameworks and tools are learning from and adopting. Even places like Laravel and Elixir are starting to see the light and benefits of the new streaming primitives and cool things we're doing in the web dev world. Occasionally, there's a groundbreaking engine innovation that allows for new techniques for rendering to existing games, but usually those get leaked or they are part of an engine that costs money and you don't get to see the inner workings underneath it The closest thing we've had to a shared progress moment in game dev has been the slow move towards shared engines between Unity and Unreal. Previously, most game studios had their own bespoke, crappy engine, and as 3D happened and more complex 3D games happened, a given studio's ability to maintain their own engine went to garbage. And now even companies like Square are leaning heavily on Unreal Engine for their products like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. It's still unbelievable to me that Kingdom Hearts is an Unreal Engine game now, but like that's what you have to do to keep up. If these wins had been open sourced throughout, it would be more viable to roll your own engine and to adopt things from other engines in the one that you're using. But since all of this is closed source and proprietary, it's just not viable. And as much as people love to shit on tools like Electron, it's enabled us to progress the quality of applications on desktop across all platforms massively. Whereas in the world of games, you basically can't do something if it's not built into Unreal or Unity. Like, good luck, have fun. Battlefield is the only one rolling a new engine for each new game. No, they're using an engine that was built at DICE called Frostbite. And Frostbite has killed multiple of my favorite series. Frostbite is a big part of why I know so much about game engines and game development, because EA allowing DICE to ruin the entirety of EA through their garbage engine that doesn't even have a menu system or a concept of a map or loading. Mass Effect died largely because of the team at DICE building Battlefield, convincing EA to force their engine on everyone else. EA learned their lesson quickly after seeing how bad Anthem and Mass Effect went, and started encouraging the studios at EA to not use Frostbite because they knew how bad it was. But DICE would circumvent them because they don't want their engine division to be shut down and convince the individual companies that work at EA to use their shit engine. It's horrifying what they have done. Versus Titanfall, which isn't dead. Titanfall has been folded into Apex Legends, which was entirely Respawn's choice. And Respawn moved from their hack of Source Engine over to Unreal Engine when EA acquired them because they wanted to use it to do much bigger experiences like they did with the Star Wars games. The acquisition of Respawn has been a net positive for both Respawn and gaming as a whole. EA does not deserve all the shit they get. DICE deserves more of the shit than EA currently gets. So, yeah. If you think Mass Effect 3 is the reason Mass Effect died and not the chaos that was Andromeda, you just don't know what's going on in the game space. I'm sorry, you're just wrong. The point I'm trying to make here is we don't get to progress as a group. If one small team has a cool innovation like we have in the web with things like Tailwind or new rendering methods in React or TRPC and new ways to pass things between server and client, in the open source world, those wins get shared across the whole ecosystem, and other tools that are unrelated will start adopting those ideas. We even saw stuff like SwiftUI, which is the prominent way to make apps in iOS now, largely based on React's way of thinking and doing things. It's awesome to watch how these ideas slowly infect the entire open source world, app dev. It even worked for Electron, but it's not working in games the same way. The only universal progress that exists in the game world is like when consoles moved over to SSDs, or Unreal Engine adds a cool feature and Unity rushes to add it soon after. That's about all, though. The lack of shared innovation in the game space is heartbreaking. It takes years, if not decades, for lessons to be learned between different studios. One very good point from chat: when the Quake engine was open sourced, it revolutionized first-person shooters as well as modding after it was released. So many of my favorite games, so many of my favorite IPs and experiences came from the Quake engine going open source. And I cannot imagine where game dev would be today if it wasn't for the giants that we got to stand on the shoulders of with those incredible, groundbreaking releases. But that's gone. It's entirely gone. And my spicy take on all of this is, we look at all of this, this is a massive failure of the game dev industry. The game dev industry not meaningfully embracing open source and the communities that form around it has put it at an existential risk of being circumvented since the decision to do this was made. It wasn't a decision, it was corporate greed, slowly centralizing all of the things that we used to build games. But there's one other point here that's really, really important. Gamers hate game devs. I don't care if anybody disagrees with this, you're wrong. The sentiment is so obvious. If you're a person who loves music, you will defend your favorite musicians tooth and nail through terrible things. If you love movies, you will defend your favorite actors. You will follow every movie that comes from your favorite director. If you love games, there's a good chance that you have talked shit on the people who made one of your favorite games. If you call yourself a gamer, like that's your identity, you have shirts that say it, you tell people that when people ask, what do you do? Oh, I'm a gamer. like capital G gamer. If that's how you identify, there's a very high, like greater than 50% chance you've said some terrible shit on a forum about a game dev that you don't know anything about, that made a game you probably haven't even played. It's actually horrifying to me as a fan of the arts how big the gap is between the enthusiastic gamer versus the enthusiastic person in the music scene, the enthusiastic cinema guy. The enthusiastic gamer looks down on the people making their games. The enthusiastic music lover looks up to the people who make music. The gap there is so tangible and so frustrating to me as a person who loves the arts, that I, as an application dev, have gotten more love than I ever have gotten, or my friends building awesome games have gotten in the game dev world. It always struck me as not just odd, but destructive that this was the case. And then the devs that are actual fucking garbage, like someone just brought up Todd Howard, getting away with murder because they hit a spec sheet with a fun list of things people align with. And the game devs that get the most credit are the ones who shit on the most work of other game devs. People like Jonathan Blow have a following because they don't actually ship games ever. They just talk shit on everyone else's. And it's heartbreaking to see that shit talking in the game space makes you much, much more successful than raising the positive works that you see others completing and sharing good stuff in the space. It has broken my heart for a decade plus now. It is getting worse, not better. Here's one. I unironically get more positive feedback in a month of developing business dashboards than I did in my entire game dev career. There you fucking go. I don't care if you disagree with me. You're wrong. Being a game dev is so shitty. You get more shit than you would doing other things. You make way less money. You have less job security. You work harder, and no one will ever care about the thing you're doing most of the time. And even if they care about the thing, they still don't care about you. It is such a thankless thing. And as a result, there is not much pride in the game dev industry right now. So it's harder to get into the game dev industry. It's harder to get started building your first game. It's harder to release that game on the platforms people actually use. It's harder to have people support you as a game dev than any other type of dev. And it's harder to make money than it is in any other type of dev. At least you love what you're doing, right? Loving what you're doing doesn't take away from the mental health hit you take when everyone else around you hates you for it. And the regularity in which I see game devs that did nothing wrong getting flamed endlessly, it breaks my heart to the point where I don't participate in the game dev space anymore because of how bad this is. It's insane. So we need ways to lower the friction for somebody who wants to start experimenting and making their first game. We need ways to solve the problems created by an industry that never open sourced its work and fears doing such because gamers are going to complain that they're doing these other things and not fixing the game that they love. The combination of gamers being entitled assholes and an industry desperate to make enough money to survive has resulted in everyone kind of losing. And AI doesn't represent a bunch of artists getting fired. AI represents a fundamental shakeup in how games are started, discovered, distributed, and more. It means that a person like Levels here can make a game that makes a lot of money, not because the game is good or even because the idea is good. Certainly not because the AI tools he built it with are good. Certainly not because his understanding of what he built is good. He can be successful because he has distribution. And for the first time, he, as a person with distribution, can circumvent this corrupt fucking industry that has kept us from sharing each other's wins for a decade now. The fact that a random person with enough followers on Twitter can make more money on a game than Sony can with the Concord shit show shows how bad the state of the current industry is. And it's not like there isn't enough money. In 2016, all film distribution made $49 billion. Games made double. Combine music and film and you're a little over half of how much money game dev makes overall. This needs to be chopped into tiny pieces. I just don't think that this is how the industry is working. The fact that this small number of companies that pushed us away from open game tools are printing money while indie devs can barely afford to get by means that we need to burn these publishers to the fucking ground. They are profiting from gamers hating the teams at the publishers, and they're the ones who are adding all of the loot boxes and crazy monetization shit and shuttering the teams that we love. The way that this ecosystem works is fundamentally wrong right now. And I can only say this so confidently coming from the music world where I watched this happen and I'm seeing us bounce back since, and coming from the software development world where the open source ecosystem allowed for small businesses to poke holes in massive ships. The fact that a company like Vercel can pop up from a small open source project like Next.js, built around Facebook's open source project React, and now they're giving AWS a run for their money, is unbelievable. That's so cool. And we don't see that at all in game dev. The closest thing we have is like Stardew Valley, which exists because Nintendo was too lazy to maintain the Harvest Moon franchise. And the reason I'm excited about AI games has nothing to do with the games themselves. It's the combination of threatening the people who prevented an open game ecosystem from existing, as well as the massively reduced barrier for entry for kids who want to make their first game. That is incredible. That's revolutionary. That is an awesome thing. Not because we're all going to be playing games built by AI. Maybe we will a little bit. Maybe we will like dick around on them on our computer when we're bored between classes like we did with Flash games. But the real reason this is incredible is people who would never have been able to get into game dev or might have tried and churned can now go all the way and make things that we can't even conceive right now. As a person who genuinely loves games, I want other people who love them to be the ones making them. I don't want corporations hiring massive teams to make super high resolution art for Assassin's Creed 72. I want inspired developers to make magical experiences that are unlike anything anyone else has seen, that kind of suck, but also challenge our knowledge and expectations of what a game is. I want gaming to keep getting better. And as much as people will hate me for saying it, the people who I want in gaming are more likely to get in if they have an AI tool to hold their hand as they get started. And if your concern is that the quality of these games is going to result in less game devs and more of these indie hackers, you're wrong. Because again, I guess kind of as a benefit of the gaming community being so shit, the lack of good open source resources means that you can't AI generate a real game because there aren't anywhere near good enough pieces for us to use in the training to AI generate a good game. But on the other hand, there are these tools that are super hard to get into, like Three.js, React 3 Fiber, or even stuff like Phaser, that are more accessible than they've ever been before. And that's a really exciting thing. And if you think you can get through all of this without coding, you're no better than the people who shit on Flash because ActionScript's not a real language, or better than the people who shit on Undertale because GameMaker is a visual programming tool. No, it's not. You have to write actual code to make anything real in GameMaker. You have to be in your code editor, moving around things and actually changing code in Cursor if you want to make a game that's even actually playable. It's not as simple as people like to think. If you honestly think that Peter dicking around in Cursor is going to take your job in the game dev world, you're probably right because you're probably bad at that job. But if you see what he's doing and your response is, oh, cool, more people getting into game dev, or that's interesting, but there's no way you can make something actually good because it's not going to have the resources needed and he probably has to learn to code anyways, you're going to be fine. Interesting take. The only IDE that doesn't require writing code is Unreal Engine. A hilarious point. And I don't think anyone would say that an Unreal Engine dev isn't a real developer because of the association that we have with the tools. I want a future where a 12-year-old Theo can open up the web, have an experience he's never had before, and then start making things. They don't have to be good. They can be as bad as Scratch games used to be. We need ways to distribute them, ways to experience them, ways to experiment and learn and make mistakes and grow. And the current game dev industry is not built to provide that. And if we want to have more games, more ideas, more options, and more variety in the game dev world, we can't get there by glazing the 3 to 4 big companies that keep re-releasing the same thing with slightly higher resolution. We need to support the people making things independently in the tools that allow for these independent creators to be more successful. Companies like itch.io, which just came up in chat, are a huge step in this direction. Companies that take smaller cuts so that these indie game devs can make more money and give them distribution and opportunities to find success in these spaces are awesome. The problem is itch.io is so scared of the backlash of doing AI game stuff that they've skirted around it and don't really support it. The game dev world's fear of AI is going to result in a hard fork between AI game dev and rest of game dev that's going to result in very little sharing of information between the two. And it's going to keep a lot of people who get into game dev through AI from feeling like they can make the jump because the game devs they look up to are going to be talking so much shit on AI that they're going to feel like they don't belong and leave. And if you want to make sure all the people who are learning how to code using Cursor and Bolt and V0 go to build apps and not games, and we end up with more and more dashboards in the world and fewer unique ideas, you're doing a great job, game industry. You're making sure that inspired kids who just want to build cool things are going to work at like Raytheon or Palantir and not build games and make awesome experiences. And if that's the world you really want to live in, you're doing a fucking awesome job. But I want to live in a world with more awesome games and more awesome people making awesome games. So stop talking shit on AI games when most of them are being made by kids trying to figure out how to get into game dev. Take out your frustrations on the people who are holding back the industry, not on the people who are trying to make it into the industry. And if you're tired of artists getting fired because they're using AI to upscale the resolutions, stop buying games based on how pretty they look. Stop buying Skyrim re-releases. Stop buying Last of Us Part 1 re-released twice. Stop fucking supporting the chaos that is Sony and their... I don't get why people buy games by Bethesda and Sony anymore. I really don't. Astrobot was good. End of rant. Game industry is a mess. People are being annoying about all of this. Stop being mad at AI when the game industry is worse than the people who are trying to build things with this stuff. And Peter did nothing wrong. I think that's a good summary of my points. People don't seem too mad at this point, so I'm proud of my handling of this one. Let me know what you guys think. Do you want to get into game dev? Is AI helping? Or did I just go on a rant defending these billion-dollar companies that you think I'm insane for doing? Enjoy the flame war in the comments. Keep sharing your thoughts. And until next time, peace, nerds.